time using this particular platform, so I'm actually very curious to see how it all plays out. So thank you for being my guinea pig today. Lisa, hello. It is so good to have you here on the Stop Shitting All Over Yourself podcast. Welcome, welcome. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thank you for asking me.
Oh, dude, after our conversation, so the reason why I asked Lisa on was because we were at an event where we were at the library, the elementary library. We're all sitting there talking, and you said something about, and I'm not going to do it justice. I'm sure it'll come out today, but you said something about how people think of retirement as the end of their lives, and they struggle with, what do I do after I retire? And how there's such a more joyful way of thinking about retirement. And I was like, oh my God, my wife talks about this kind of thing all the time. I was like, I had that problem, and I used to look at it in such a negative way. And Lisa has this perspective that is like, your life kind of begins at retirement, right? So like, why do we even call it retirement? But we'll come to that later. So Lisa, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I have a huge background in leadership development and coaching, and it was all around like career coaching. And so, but what I do now is kind of an extension of that. And so a very good friend and colleague of mine, we'd worked together for over 20 years. We started this business about 3 years ago called The Future of You. And basically what The Future of You does is it provides a roadmap and resources to help people really think about this next chapter and to reinvent and create a personalized view of what retirement looks like for them. And we do it through a lot of things, but for the most part, we have either some online resources and a roadmap and a toolkit that folks can use. And then we also have employer-sponsored programs where we do workshops for companies. Oh, Manessa, I can't hear you.
Right. We have to unmute the mic when we start talking. So the question I have actually is, what is like, because, we talk about, okay, retirement, so planning this out and so on, but like, what is wrong with the current model of the way people think about retirement?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I remember looking up the definition of the word retirement when I started doing this. And the thing that's really funny is it was all about like the end and death and, kind of like
putting you in the mausoleum and you're like, I'm not dead yet.
Right. And we always say it's the 3 G's: gardening, grandparenting, and golf, right? Like there's like this set view of what retirement is. And the more people that I talk to about it, the more I realize that just like we all are very individual, we really all have a different like vantage point of it. And so what ended up happening, it was really interesting, is a bunch of my friends started, I'd worked for years at Fidelity Investments, and they offered an early retirement package, and a bunch of my friends started taking it. They were a little bit ahead of the game of me, and they were having a blast. Like the money part of retirement, because we worked at Fidelity all those years, was all taken, like at least the planning part of it was all taken care of, and people felt somewhat secured in that. But the what am I going to do with my time and who am I going to be, the identity part of it was daunting. And I'm talking about super successful people who really managed their whole life, right? They managed their careers brilliantly. Our definition of retirement is you go from 60 miles an hour, an overflowing calendar, to nothing, to this big open space, like, right? And it was so overwhelming for some people. And my business partner at the time was my first client. I didn't even realize it. And she called me up and she's like, she's scratch golfer, never golfed, never traveled so much. Everything's great. And I'm miserable. I've got a lot more gas in the tank and I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's because that view of retirement that we're spoon-fed from day one is the same view for all. And it's very conforming and it doesn't really fit. And so we said, you know what? Retirement needs a reboot. And I read this cool article called Designing a Retirement That Excites You. And it really kind of sparked my interest. I heard this, it was kind of like all these things came together, right? So I read that article. I saw this Forbes magazine piece that said by 2030, all baby boomers are going to hit 65. And we're the
That's
second
not far away.
No, we're the second largest population out there.
Oh, geez.
Of a generation, right? But the other thing that's fascinating, that means 10,000 people a day hit retirement age.
Wow.
And, and some of them do it with grace, and others of them do it with what the heck? They're frightened and they're anxious because of the uncertainty. And that kind of definition and view that we've kind of been socialized around all these years, that, we should be really excited to do this. We should stop working at 65. We should, right?
Yeah.
What I've learned is you've got to just know what's right for you. And with a little bit of tools and learning from others who've gone before you, you can design a retirement that excites you, but you can make this some of the most fulfilling part of your life. It's just fascinating, the stories we've collected.
It's so interesting. You said earlier on, and I, even when we talked before, this didn't actually resonate exactly the same way, but this time you said it, and I was like, oh yeah, because it resonated. Now this time I remembered something. So, a while back, my wife and I, she had said to me that, I was always working, and I really was workaholic, and it was a problem. I ended up going, burning out, going to the hospital, blah, blah. But that's not the important part of the story, because obviously that's not an issue anymore. The important part is after the hospital, and I come back home, and I'm like, okay, I need to now work less and, be more mindful so that I'm, and so she is very good with boundaries. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to clock out at 5. So I start clocking out at 5. And I swear to God, I'm walking around in house slippers and pajama pants, being shuffling things from one room to another, being like, I literally don't know what to do with myself when I am not working. And because I knew I had to, I started to think about it, right? And I'm like, oh my God, because I understood what that meant. What that meant is that I had constructed an entire identity, life, goals, schedule, plans. Literally my entire life is built around this. And I'm still in it. And I'm taking this time off, and I'm thinking things like, I'm worthless, I'm useless. Why are they even, those stories start to come because I'm not producing. So how am I even a valid member of society, right? So now I'm thinking to myself, well, fuck. Now I'm 65 and retiring. What kind of message have we been sending the people in our lives, people that we love, sending people that we love ourselves, right? That basically you need to do all of this. Is the cap. I feel like I'm going through the capitalist machine at work right now, right? Where we spend all of our time working, and then it ends, and then it's just like, can I ask you something? Does that, in your work, have you found that leads to a lot of depression?
Yeah, we have. There's a lot of statistics on that, and also, the other thing that I think leads to the depression is the loss of identity, the loss of purpose, contribution, but also community. And that's one of the big things that we find in our workshop piece, especially, is that you're not in this alone, but also there's tons of research out there, Robert Waldringer in particular, who's on how being in community, people live longer, healthier, there's less percentage of dementia. So it's that identity and community pieces that lead to depression in some people.
That makes a lot of sense. You're seeing some of that, even with the COVID environment where a lot of people are working from home, you have a subset of people like me who are thriving in the home environment, but there are people who really need but I still have a community online and relationships and that kind of thing. If you don't know how to build a community online, or you don't feel like you have that community, and now you've lost the community you had at work, there's where a lot of that depression stuff comes from. That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So, when I think about that, so when you work with your client, I'm curious, do you ever work with clients who are young? And when I say young, I mean younger than what you would, somebody who's not retiring in the next 5 years, someone, because that seems smart to me. A 35-year-old who's help me plan for my retirement.
So it's so funny you should say that. When we first started doing this, it was very organic, right? So we threw this, my friend who, the scratch golfer, my co-partner here in crime, she is very schooled in a methodology that we used a lot at Fidelity. And I also was trained in it. It's called design thinking. And it's basically an innovation methodology and framework that's from the Stanford Business School. And the first step is fall in love with the problem. So we started falling in love with this problem, and we threw out on LinkedIn, hey, does anybody want to, here's what we're thinking. We want to learn more about it. And so we had a very wide swath of people that we started talking to, and it was people at various ages and stages. And what was fascinating is we first started looking at people, 5 years out, right? And then we kind of broadened it to, well, what about those adjacencies, like people who always just had their own business, right? And who are saying, I'm never going to retire because I just, they have their own gig going on, right? And so we ended up talking to over 50 people. So we ended up doing this big kind of, and then we combed through like pages and pages and analyzed our feedback, and we came up with interesting data. And so the first thing we came up with is people fell into 3 categories, right? There were the people that were overwhelmed and really like just unsettled, right? And they were either in retirement or they were starting to think about retirement, but they just felt like hopeless, quite frankly. And those, we had some people that really, we did interview people who were really depressed, I would say are depressed, even though I'm not a clinician, can't diagnose that, right? Then we had these people in the middle that were cautiously optimistic, is how we would talk about them. And they were the people like my brother, who the current view and the current script on retirement doesn't fit them, but they know they've got the money. And they know they should retire, and they probably kind of want to scale back, but they don't know how. And so they're aiming, but they're kicking the can down, and they're not like firing, right? They're not, they're like putting it off. And then we had these people that we call excited and engaged. And they were the ones that were, oh my goodness, Manessa, kicking it out of the ballpark, right? We then formed a roadmap, and we looked at those guys and we said, what is it that they do differently? And we came up with 5 things that they did differently. And then we built a workshop around it and a whole toolkit around it and a roadmap around it. And we tested it. And as we tested it, we iterated with real people. And the reason why I bring that up is you said, what ages? Everyone always asks me, what's the sweet spot, right? So yeah, you could say 1 to 3 years or 1 to 5 years. But we had people who were 10 years out, and they were planners. And I always say, if it's in their consciousness, like someone says, who's the best person for this? I'm like, well, if someone's thinking about it and trying to design it, that's the right person. So we've had people in their late 40s, early 50s, all the way, to in their 70s, quite frankly, who are still hanging on. In one of our corporate classes, they worked at a company for over 40 years, and they were just, kind of stuck in their minds about what's next, because this whole fear of, losing your identity and just the anxiety of the uncertainty.
Yes. The uncertainty is like, I think ultimately, it really does come down to the uncertainty, but how much do because we don't know what's going to happen. But I think there's also an element of like, our society values productivity, right? And like, that's like the pinnacle of all. And so if you're not producing, like, what's you're pointless, useless, worthless, right? And that's not true. But society, we internal, like, and I think about this, when I think about, why I wouldn't take rest before, right? Because like I wouldn't rest because if I'm not doing work, how am I providing value? And so I feel like, there's an element of education that needs to happen, because I didn't want to retire for many years. So here's what happened with my life, right? I was like, I'm not retiring. Fuck retirement. Who needs to do that? Retirement, no. And I'm always going to work. I love working. I love my job. That's what I'm going to do, right? And my wife was like, she just kept saying retirement, and she's just like, she's been saving and doing all of the, you and my wife, you're going to meet at the conference, you're going to love each other. And, but she and finally we actually had a conversation one day where we realized that the problem was that we were defining retirement differently. And so in her mind, retirement meant, well, let me tell you what my mind was. In my mind, retirement is everything that we just talked about. Okay, so basically I die, I'm just not actually dead yet. So you haven't really put me in the coffin, but I'm already dead. Okay. And then, and that sucks. It's a horrible, horrible philosophy. It's a horrible story. The other one, which I really like this way better, is when you have enough money that is paying for you to live so that you can do whatever the hell you want. And at that point, you want to keep doing your job at Fidelity, keep doing your job at Fidelity. You want to go and, become an underwater basket weaver, go do that. You can do literally whatever you want. And I said, I subscribe to this philosophy. And once we got on the same page in like our definitions, it moved us in that direction. I'm wondering, how much of your work do you do that is about moving people like me from one space to the other?
Huge. That's the whole thing, quite frankly. One of the things that we always hear from people, and the way I sum it up, and you'll get this because you've worked with a lot of coaches, is we give people choice and agency. Mm-hmm. Right? The current definition of retirement doesn't. It's right. And so what we say is, create your own definition based on your own, personal view of that. We've beat dreaming out of ourselves all these years, right? We're on this career path. We're going that way. What we do is we help people envision and dream. So we have a very interactive journal that we bring people through, and a series of modules that people go through that really help them revisit past things that they wanted to do, or really start to dream about, well, what could this next chapter look like? It's so funny, when you were talking, it reminded me of when I first started this personally. My daughter was getting ready. Our daughter was getting ready to go to college. And so, I'm a career coach. I work with people as they transition to vice presidents and executives. And so I was like, oh, let me, so we were talking, and I was so blown away by all the cool resources that were out there to help her envision her life. And I started to think, in the next year or so, I'm going to get the package. This is cool. I bet there's tons of stuff out there, right? I'm the tail end of the baby boomers. So I'm like, I bet there's tons of stuff out there for people like me. And what I found, which was so really disheartening, was it was all about the finances. All about the finances. Nothing about how I wanted to spend my time. And for me, that felt backwards. That even though, yes, I had, I had that kind of, I had enough support for my financial planning because of what I did for a living, where I worked all these years, but it just felt backwards. And my financial planner, I will never forget, was like, okay, give me the date. When do you want to retire? Where do you want to live? And I'll give you the money. And I'm like, the number for the money. And I'm like, well, what do you mean about retirement? It's exactly like what your wife said to you. For me, it just meant I'm not going to work as many hours. It didn't. And for her, it meant you're not earning any income.
Yeah.
And that's not what it meant for me. And until I got that, straight with her and started thinking about it, I love the fact I have the freedom and flexibility to be an entrepreneur at 61 and try this thing out and take all of who I've been my whole life and put it in a different context. I saw this great quote. It's, I'm not starting from scratch. I'm starting from experience. So I'm not abandoning my identity, right? It's just the next, 2.0 of it and a different context, right? One of the cool things we do is we created a tool called the Life Portfolio. And just like you have a portfolio of assets for your finances, and you shift up the asset allocation at different stages of your life, when my kids go to college, whatever, you have a life portfolio, and the assets are your time and how you're going to spend it. And so we divide it up into 5 sectors, and we have you do a current state analysis and ask yourself, is it just right, too much, or not enough? Right? And then we say, all right, now let's dream. Let's start to think about, what do you want it to be next? And so then that's where we begin our work together. And then we help people start to think about, well, what are those little experiments and things I can do to start to today, no matter where I am, if it's someone 10 years out, 2 years out, 3 years out, already retired, wherever, you can start doing that. So we kind of teach people how to fish instead of giving them a fish. It's not one and done, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a practice because like my wife and I have been having, so it's funny you should say that. Some of the, where you talk about, your life portfolio and sort of like the things that you want to do and dream and so on. And what happened out of the conversation that she and I had about probably 20, like it was not very long ago. So it wasn't last year, it was the year before last. So 2021. And we went on vacation to Anna Maria, which was where we got married, had our honeymoon. We go have you ever been?
No.
It's in Florida. It's lovely. I mean, it was lovely. Now it's, now whatever, because it's covered in seaweed. But I love Anna Maria. And when it's not covered in seaweed, it's still going to be gorgeous. I love you, Anna Maria. But we were there, and we've always wanted to live on the island and or live there. And then, we were having a conversation about build the life you want to live and then pay for it. That's sort of like how she said, build the life you want to live, and then we save the money to pay for it when we retire. And so I've always wanted to live by the water. And we had this great house in Franklin that, great investment, great location. When the time came for us to retire, we'd be able to sell it, make a ton of money, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't want to wait until we retire to live by the ocean. Like, I want to live by the ocean right now. And so, I've been having this conversation for a while. And in this particular day, I had the language I needed. I said, you keep saying to build the life I want to live and then save for it. The life I want to live has a house on the ocean. So all I'm saying is, can we get that house now? Right? And she was like, why don't we look and see? And that happened to be right when the rates went down to almost nothing 2 years ago, and the house price. So like, we got the house on the ocean specifically because we went during that time. So I think this exercise that you're talking about, I'm curious to know when your students go through it, do you often find that they don't just end up figuring out things they're going to do in retirement, but they probably end up with a list of things they're like, I'm going to start doing this now. Like, I'm going to start pottery classes now.
Because that's one of the key things that we noticed in the people that were excited and engaged. So we ended up creating a 4-step proprietary process that we bring people through. Mm-hmm. And one was rebalance your life portfolio, which is what I just spoke of. Another one that is huge is connecting to your purpose. And we all have a purpose. And I used to, believe me, I got paid a lot of money to go out and look for purpose workshops. And I'll never forget, I went to one, and it was 3 days of navel gazing, and I left it with a purpose statement that was perfectly crafted. I was the yeast in the bread of life. Oh. Which I have no clue what that means, but I was very proud of it.
But I'm going to say that to you every time I see you now. I'm going to be like, Lisa, today you look like the yeast in the bread of life.
And then it was like really crazy. And then as I was doing research for this and heard how important it was about purpose, I found this guy's name is Richard Leider, Leider. He's fabulous. All kinds of TED Talks and things, very easy to look up. And we not only leverage our own research, we also go with adjacencies. Like I talked about Waldringer, I'm talking about Leider. Yeah. And what he says is, we all have a purpose. It's a part of our DNA. It's about discovering it and igniting it. And he said, you can name your purpose in 5 minutes on the back of a napkin. And he has this napkin test. So we do that. And then once you've got here are the different sectors and what I want more and less of in my life, and you start to think about your purpose, we talk about what you're saying, which is, we coined a new phrase. We call it activating retirement.
I love it.
And it's all about, like, those people that were excited and engaged, they did little experiments, and many of them did it on the side of their desk while they were still working. Yeah. They were curious, and I did this research that we started. I was still working full time when I started doing it, because I got so many calls from so many people in my life that were struggling with this. And this is supposed to be the happiest time of your life, right? You hear, or everything we've worked for. And it's such a blah.
What a letdown. This is the greatest day of my life.
Right? And if not, then you can hear it. Like, you hear people who are new to it and they're talking themselves into it, right?
Yeah, I love it. So fun. Oh, it's so fun.
Yeah. But no one talks about this like it's the shooting, right? No one talks about this can be time of anxiety, and it can be
Yeah.
a time that it's a roller coaster. But so we say start these little experiments before, and if nothing else, you learn what you don't want to do, right?
Yeah.
And so that's we do have people, and what is so fulfilling for me is this silly little life portfolio tool that I was doing on myself and trying to figure out. It like ignites people, it motivates them, it engages them. So it doesn't feel like, oh, I've got to do all this work. I've got to, right? It's
Yeah.
not like a big journal. It's just this little kind of thing. And what I find is how much it ignites people's planning and their again sense of adventure, their imagination in lots of ways.
You know what's interesting? You kind of just gave me a vision right now, right? And it's because the vision you gave me was this, right? So you talked about trying, right? Like trying the little experiments. And I think you have people who are prone to, they're like, I will try things. I will try anything. I'm not afraid of what's going to happen. And then you have people who are like, I'm afraid of everything. I'm not trying anything because God knows what could happen. Now, I used to be that second person, right? Where I had gotten so afraid I wouldn't even leave the house. I got just completely just housebound. I was like, I was afraid what would happen if I walked out the door. And forget dyeing my hair blue. Oh my God, that would be insane. But I think that like what's really great is about what you're talking about is almost like in order for someone to know that it is safe to do those things, right? Because they have to feel safe for it. This workshop almost gives you like here's a safe environment. There's a fence. Nothing bad's going to happen. Now let's start doing this, right? And I think that like what happens is like you teach them this one thing and they practice it. And then they're like, oh my God, right? So they get that dopamine hit and then they realize they're not going to die. And it is okay, right? And so like it almost greases the wheel now. So it primes the pump so that when you do retire, you're not trying new things. Like it's almost like, because like you lock off your head, it's like, here you go, you thud, and then now start everything new. And now I go back to what you said earlier, where you said, I'm not coming with a blank slate. Like I have a rich history. There's a whole person here, right? And then we start to see ourselves instead of somebody who's just closing the lid on life and say, okay, now what? It's, oh my God, I created all of these things. What am I going to do with these things now? Like, how am I going to use these things now?
Yeah. I love what you just said, because for me, one of the things I love about being in my 60s, I have to be really honest with you, and I don't often think of the number, but what I love about where I am in my life, maybe I should say right now, is I always went through life with FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. So I jam-packed, I fit, and I still sometimes to this day, because I've got such, a freedom of schedule, but I like having a certain level of activity. Like, I'm at pickleball 3 times a week. I'm playing golf a couple of times a week. I'm on my spin bike, that's me though. But what I love is it gives me at this point to say, nah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Or yes, I do. And I'll make time for it. And I feel like instead of letting that opportunity or that ask drive me, I put that ask through my filter, and I'm able to say, is this gonna even like I still have folks reaching out to me, and I do some work on the side, my coaching practice for executives for as they transition, a career coaching practice, and I'm affiliated with a company that does that. But there are times when people will reach out to me and they'll be like, oh, can you do this for me? Like, I'd love you, because I've done contract work for them. And I'm like, yeah, no, never, ever want to do that.
I'm not doing that anymore.
Right? Yeah, I'm not doing performance management ever again. Sorry. I know. I used to love it. No. And so there's something about getting so solid on like my life portfolio and my purpose. And it's like, is that because that's going to fulfill me.
Yeah.
That's going to, it's not a job then, Manessa.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a passion, it's a purpose, it's motivating, right? It's different. I'm fortunate my career did a lot of that for me. It sounds like yours did too. I was well fitted for what I do for a living, but I did too much of it, or I started to, you're in a big company and there's, I play well with others. So I know the whole political landscape and can do it, but that's a lot of energy. Who wants to, I'm like, yeah, never want to do that anymore. Don't want to do that. I'll help you.
This is why I love you. This is absolutely why I want to join the podcast, because I feel you so hard. I love that you can, because really that's the freedom, right? And when you talk about retirement like this, I'm like, dude, I can't wait to retire. So now my wife and I are always like, the other day she said we hit like a number in our retirement assets, and she's like, all right, now if we retired today, we'd get $1,000 every month for the rest of our lives. And I'm like, woohoo! I was like, can we retire? No, not yet. But still, we made a huge milestone. So I'm curious, as we start to sort of wind down, I'm actually curious to know a little bit more about, so you mentioned earlier that you work with people one-on-one, you have workshops, you have things like that. So I sort of what are the modalities in which you work with people, and how does that work? Because there's so many different ways it seems like you can apply this. I'd be curious to know what the different ones are and how that goes.
Yeah. Before I jump in there, this is a little backdrop, and it's so funny. Something you just said that got me to think about this. It's the financial piece, right? And it's like, which comes first? It feels very chicken egg, right? So recently, we've been approached by a couple of financial services planning firms because they're even noticing that there are people in their population of clients that have the money but are reluctant to retire. Mm-hmm. And they're saying they're very caring and holistic financial planning organizations. And they're saying, if we really are doing our job, we want to help people more holistically. Yeah. And there's a whole holistic retirement planning movement that's coming out of that financial services industry. And not a lot of them are there, but you see that. So we've got two.
It's delicious.
Starting. And what's neat about it is they're loving our stuff, and they're saying, hey, are there ways we can partner together, which is really kind of cool, right? So we offer, I'd say, 2 avenues to get our stuff. One is for individuals. We offer what we call Jump Starter and Jump Starter Plus. We have an online learning platform, and it's built, there are 6 modules that bring you through our roadmap. You get a lifetime access to all our stuff, because we're big on this should never be one and done. You should try things as you go. So you get all our modules. They're articles from like Harvard Business Review, Forbes, TED Talks, YouTube videos from all types of people that are in this space that we've included in our roadmap. We have online learning videos that we've created. We have a very detailed but engaging learning journal that's a guide that takes you through those 6 modules, if you will. And so you can do that all by yourself online on your own, and we call that Jump Starter. Now, there are some people that really love to do this and be held accountable, and they love the coaching element. So we built Jump Starter Plus, and we put in 3 coaching sessions. So you meet, and then there's like an introductory session at the beginning, and then at strategic points along the way, there's 3 sessions where you meet with a coach, and that coach is an accountability coach, if you will. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes people will then say, I want to keep this up, and they'll buy another package that would add on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right?
It really does. I feel like 3 is great, but I feel like if you really want to turn it into a lifetime habit, you want to spend that time, just to make sure it's really there.
Yes, and we want to make sure that people access this in a way that they can consume it for themselves. Right. And we know that it's very individual, so we didn't want to handcuff people to getting the coaching. And so we did it in 2 ways. One's no coaching, one's with coaching through that first, and then add-on coaching. And all our coaches are people like that live it. They walk the talk. So you might be too young for this, but I always say, and so I'm really dating myself. There was this guy, and his name was Cy Sperling, and he did the hair club for men.
Oh my
And
God! Oh, the hair club for men. Oh, I'm not as young as I look. That's hysterical.
the tagline was, "I'm not only the president, I am also one of our key clients."
I remember that. Oh my God, I remember his voice. It's all coming back to me now. I'm going to put this in the link is going to be in the show notes, everyone who wants to hear his delightful voice again.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. So my business partner Nan Ives and I always say that to her. Like we are the guinea pigs, right? We do this. So we've got all of that. Plus we've run this through 6 times before we finalized it, and we iterated it with real people and going through all of this. Then we've started to get some interest from employers. Really interesting people who were like, we want to help people from like a diversity and inclusion, like at all stages and ages along their career journey in our company. And so we know people are hanging in there because of this uncertainty, but we want them to be able to have the freedom and flexibility to move on. And so how do we do that? And so we have created this accelerator workshop, which is 6 weeks. We meet once a week and bring them through everything that's in Jumpstarter. Just we do it live. They have access to it all on the learning platform like Jumpstarter. They also can, but the added bonus from that is they do it in a community. And we've done it as an open enrollment. It's just hard to kind of get everybody on the same day. It's much easier to have someone buy a workshop and they fill it. But it is so powerful when you're with other people at the same, right? That are
absolutely, especially if they're all in the same area. You learn so much just from the questions people ask. Like it's tenfold, 12. It's so much better. Like I would always recommend doing that.
And if they're in the same company, we've found even stronger. And man, talk about the brand loyalty and ambassadorship when these people leave.
Yeah.
And we're even saying, oh my gosh, all my friends are saying, I've never heard of a company that does this for their folks. And again, everyone gets total access, lifetime access to all our stuff. So that one is like our community, and we call it Accelerator.
I love it. Love it. And you know, something you said earlier where you were talking about diversity and inclusion and like making sure that people at all ages are taken care of. You know, as I was preparing for this podcast and I was really reflecting upon our previous conversation, I even wrote this down because I didn't want to say it wrong because I thought about something that I realized. I've been talking to so many people lately who are, and we've been seeing so many people in the world right now of so many different backgrounds that I think that, you know, they're all speaking up about this story that we've told, this way that it's been is not okay, right? And so I think what we're seeing happening in the world right now is like a collective rejection of the status quo that like is related to gender, race, sexuality, age, mental health, disability. Like the people in those groups are saying, you know what, we are absolutely done with the story that was written long before we were even born about who we are, what we can do, how we should retire. People are tired of living under the societal belief systems that are assigned to us by default, right? And so I feel like every person I talk to is someone who, like yourself, for a group of people has said, no more. Like, we're done. We are moving into a different space, which I feel like so much like the millennials right now, or like the generations that are coming now, like my generation, like, so Gen X, like, so I'm like a few years, like 77, so I'm like right at the end of Gen X, a couple of years, but like my generation is going to reap many of the rewards from what it is that you guys are doing at the end of the boomer generation for what you're creating right now, because by the time my group starts to retire, right, and you will have all these systems in place, so you will be able to be like, listen, we put this in place so that you didn't have to suffer like we did. Breaking that cycle of trauma. Rock on.
We are like trailblazers, right?
Although I'll be
pooped by then, so I'll be like,
dude, I'm retired. Go talk to somebody. I'm retired from retiring. I'm doing something else now. You know, and that's actually the joy when I think about myself in terms of my life, right? And I don't know what your separations would be, but in my mind, about every 7 to 10 years, I'm a different person and have a whole different set of things, right? So if you retire at 60, there's like 3 different people you can be, right? So it's like, no, I mean, like, and if you decide in the story in your mind, you're like, hey, it's ended, then there's 3 whole people that you're not going to be able to be because you already decided that.
So that's brilliant that you caught that, because that really jazzes me. So my purpose is, I love and have always loved this is what it turned into from the yeast and the bread of life BS, right? I just love to help people live to their potential. I love that. That's just, it hooks me, right? And so I've done it throughout my whole career. Silly things like when I first had the first training job I ever had was helping people with a new customer service computer program. And when they couldn't make sense of it, I'd make sense of it and help them with that. To my job as a corporate executive, helping people as they become executives, right? To the way I've parented my kids and launched them off to college, and my recent grad who just graduated college, right? In my marriage, like when I think about it and I look back, the role I play with my siblings, I'm always the one who's the helping them discover their purpose and do it in a way that's not traditional. Like, why can't you? My brother is 67, and he's like the oldest person. He's number one sales guy. He's always winning awards, blah, blah, blah. And his boss is like, please don't retire. Please don't retire. Please don't retire. And my brother's like, I got the money. I can retire. I should retire. And I'm like, stop. Like, stop. What do you love? And he goes, this is what I go, what do you love about your job? Cut a deal with them. Tell them that's what you want to do. Work a couple of days less. He goes, I go, what do you hate? I hate all the new systems. I'm like, I bet he'd hire someone because you bring in the bucks.
Right.
Someone like take care of all these systems. And sure enough, hasn't he said that? He goes, Tony, so it's like that, right? It's just so cool to connect to your purpose, to see it out there. And for me, I don't know when I'm going to stop this. I just, like you, every couple of years, I'll figure it out, how much, how little. And is it still jazzing me? What's bringing me, and do I still have time for the things if I just want to play this time, and giving back, like you and I serve on a board. That's big for me. I couldn't always do that when I worked full time. Yeah. So it's one of those things in my life portfolio. When I look at those 5 sectors, there's like a spirituality section, right? There's a physical kind of section. There's relationships, family and friends, right? There's work. What I feel is, and what I call work is contribution. It might not be for money, but it's like, how do I contribute to society?
Oh my God. Love that. Love that so much. It has been such a glorious time talking to you today. I wanted to ask really quick, if people were to work with you, where can they find you?
Sure. Our work, my website is thefutureofyou.com. And if anyone wants to speak to me personally, it's lisa@thefutureofyou.com. That's my email.
Fabulous. And we'll have all of those in the show notes. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today. This was absolutely fabulous. I cannot wait to get this up there. Thank you. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you so much, Vanessa. Take care now.